This is the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. Here's Robert Kiyosaki.
Hello. Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show. The good news and bad news about money. And today a very, very special guest, longtime friend, somebody I love and respect. And when her name is Nomi Prins, and when she speaks, I listen because she is an insider to a very, very, very rarefied world. Is the world of the central banks. And so years ago, I was up in Alaska and was freezing my butt off. And I was reading her book, Collusion. I was going, boy, talk about being able to see what you and I will never see. And that's Nomi Prins. I mean, she is an insider on the central bank. She's traveled the world. And she's not just an academic type. She's really gone to look at them from the inside out. Any comments? And she's a dear friend of Kim. She's another rich woman. So, Kim, anything you want to say about Nomi?
I'm excited to hear what Nomi has to say today because the book Collusion, the subtitle is How Central Banks Rig the World. And she's coming out with her new book, which I can't wait for, Permanent Distortion, How the Financial Markets Abandoned the Real Economy Forever. And we've had this discussion a little bit, Nomi, so really looking forward to it. And to, if I can just lead it off, can you just give us a little bit of your background? Because it's been a while since you've been on our program. So what's your background with central banks and your credentials, let's say?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for that, Kim and Robert. So glad to be back. Been doing a lot of traveling. My credentials. Okay, so I worked on Wall Street and in the city of London for almost 2 decades. I worked as a managing director at Goldman Sachs. I was a senior managing director at Bear Stearns. I was an executive at Lehman Brothers, and I started off at the Chase Manhattan Bank. And the through line to central banks when I was doing that and why I left to become an investigative journalist and an author and to basically tell people what's really going on and to continue to do that, is that I was out talking to central banks in China and Japan and Korea and Taiwan, et cetera, back in the early 90s when no one really went over there to do that. That's while I was working at Lehman Brothers on Wall Street. But through the years, I have all those conversations to being around the world with particular focus on the Fed in the United States and the New York Fed. Actually, a former colleague of mine at Goldman Sachs, while I was at Goldman Sachs, Bill Dudley, wound up running the New York Fed for quite some time as well. And so I've known these people from before they went to the various Feds. I followed central banks for decades. And what I've seen since particularly the financial crisis and then the pandemic is just central banks on complete steroids around the world and really dismantling that relationship between the capital markets, the free markets, and the real economy to an irreversible extent. And that's why I call it now the permanent distortion.
Yeah, and as my concern today is for Kim and I, our real issue is social unrest. The gap between the rich and poor is now excessive, and that leads to revolution, civil rioting, and all this. And this is an excerpt from the introduction to her book, Permanent Distortion. It says, when you print all this fake money and you rig it for the rich only, which is fine with me, but you should tell people. That's what Nomi's doing, is rigged. Mm-hmm. It says what that produces is a wave of intensified and widespread social unrest, disjointed political upheaval, dangerous extremism, punishing trade wars, and sweeping isolation. And that's what Nomi is writing about when you rig the system for the rich. And just FY as a commercial message, Rich Dad would rather have you become rich than revolt. So any comments, Kim?
On that point of all of these things happening, how did you go from Collusion to the new book? What have you seen happening since the market, since the crash, since the pandemic? What's changed in your mindset, in your viewpoint?
Yeah, so what happened was, as we know, after the financial crisis, everything got crazy disjointed between the markets and the real economy already. And that was because the Federal Reserve stepped in and they basically created out of nowhere $4.5 trillion worth of money. I mean, wouldn't everybody like to press a button and do that? As well as they brought rates down to zero. And what I called a collusion was they basically worked with other central banks around the world. So Bank of Japan, European Central Bank, et cetera, to really do the same thing. And so for a while, the world was floating on this fabricated, this fake money. And what that created was a situation where financial assets appreciated, went up, markets went up ultimately, but the real economy very much dragged. And that was going on for years. And the result of that sort of culminated in 2019, where we had a year of the most riots, the most civil unrest, and the most general upheaval economically. Even after all this year of fake money, all these years of cheap money, it was considered the highest year of that kind of unrest until now. And so what happened after 2019 is the Fed went back to zero interest rates. They had raised them a little bit, and then they dropped them back down. Right now, we're seeing them raise again. So they do have this ability to go up and down with rates when they feel like it and to create money when they feel like it. And then the pandemic happened and the Fed created another $4.5 trillion worth of money out of nowhere. So now the Fed's sitting on $9 trillion of giveaway money that flows into the markets, that creates an appreciation of assets, financial assets all over the place, but again, leaves the real economy behind. And now what we're seeing is the Fed's going back on that. It's raising rates a little bit. It still has $9 trillion worth of assets. It still has that money in the market, but now the economy is starting to slow down. And so what we're seeing time and time again is when the Fed gets involved, it helps the markets, it helps participants in the markets, and up or down, it leaves the real economy behind. And that's why I wanted to write this permanent distortion book, because this is where we're at. Whether rates are moved up or down, this is where we're at. This is where central banks are at for the rest of our lifetimes.
And for years, they've linked the stock market. Oh, the stock market's doing great, so the economy is doing great. And there was such a disconnect between the stock market and what's happening, as to your point, in the real economy. People are struggling, they're out of work. Inflation's hitting. So the economy is in horrible shape, yet the narrative is still, oh, the economy is doing well because the markets are doing well. So everybody should be happy. What would you say to that?
Well, that's exactly right. And the thing is, when the markets are doing well because of fake money, it's very different from them doing well because companies are producing, or because wages are, keeping up with inflation, or because consumers are buying, or because of any of the things that create a long-term stable economy, including growth, including development, housing, infrastructure, all of those things that require real money, real investment, and have real growth.
Yeah.
When you're just investing in financial assets, which you can't touch or feel, because the money is so cheap and just available from central banks, well, then that's the result. The markets get ahead of the real economy, and the real economy just can't catch up because it doesn't have that kind of free money. And that's what we're in right now. But now we have an inflation problem because of various reasons, including the fact that the Fed forgot inflation was happening as it was rising, called it transitional. But even if the Fed can't affect inflation, people are feeling inflation. And now they're seeing rates creep back up. And that's hurting the average person's ability to even buy a home with a mortgage right now. So whatever the Fed does, it winds up hurting the sort of average person and the real economy.
So what that causes, what we call the everything bubble, where real estate goes up, stocks go up, and bonds go up. And the trouble is, it only makes the bankers richer.
Well, because they're moving all that stuff around. That's exactly right, Robert. It makes the bankers richer because they don't care where money's going. They will basically, it's like a hate-seeking missile, right? They're going to find where the money is hottest. They're going to leverage that money because it's cheap and available. That's where the bankers go. That's where their friend investors go. That's why BlackRock, who's sitting on a $9-10 trillion book of assets, will go. It's where everyone who has the ability to get money cheaply will push that money. And they want it to make money fast. They want money to reproduce quickly. And in that way, they want money to be like a virus, produce quickly, reproduce quickly. But that doesn't mean it has the staying power to create that long-term money flow. Like, I know, Kim, you look at this a lot, that cash flow on a long-term basis, say from real estate, or just from foundational growth of the economy. It's in and out. And that's what we've seen with these bubbles. It's just in and out.
So the thing that I think is kind of funny, because I want to get to what you see on the inside. Question is, are these bad people? That's what I'm going to ask you, okay? We know what they're doing is bad, but are they bad people? Before I go on, I always thought it was funny that Bernanke gets up there and he says, we have a thing called a printing press, and that's why they call him Helicopter Ben.
Right.
And everybody says, oh, they would never do that. So, well, what do you think the stimmy checks were? All the stimmy checks were helicopter money from the banks, Treasury and the banks. I mean, the Fed.
Well, that's exactly right. If the Fed hadn't stepped in and created money at that moment, that money would not have been available. It is about the Fed basically, sort of moving some digits on a computer, creating this sort of fake money, and then buying bonds or buying the debt of the U.S. government or of the housing market or whatever it might be with that fake money. And that creates this additional bubble. And so, yeah, it's a good question. Are these people evil? Well, you didn't say evil. I'm throwing that into your Are they bad people? You know what? A person can be good or bad, whether they're rich or poor. That's my ultimate belief. I mean, I think that's an as per basis either way. But these are definitely people who had the ability and the capability to use the rigging of the system in their favor in an outsized way. And yes, some of them committed crimes along the way in doing that. Some of them skirted just between the lines and didn't. And a lot of times the individuals who got very rich at the banks could hide within their banks. If Goldman Sachs, for example, paid, which they did, a $550 million fine for some of the stuff they did to the housing market back in the financial crisis days, that money didn't come out of the pockets of their CEOs or of their executives. It came out of sort of their corporate till. So in that way, the people that work for these large banks and large institutions can take advantage of all this cheap money as well through the shares or the options they own in their own companies. And if something goes wrong, like something illegal,
they bail them out. They bail them out.
We bail them out. And that's what the Fed's done.
Well, not only the Fed, what I think is hysterical is that when Obama got elected, everybody, Obama's for the people. But when he got elected, the first thing he did was bail out the banks and General Motors and all the failing companies. He is on the inside. I mean, he's working with them. And everybody, he's a man of the people. Bullshit. He bailed out the rich again. You know what I mean? Give me a break. Not what the guys, he's a smooth talker.
But he was definitely, yes.
Watch what they do. Watch what they do. Not what they say. What are they doing? And he bailed out the rich. Oh, but he's a man of the people. Give me an effing break.
You are so right, Robert. The reality is, and I have this in my book, All the President's Bankers, very specifically, because that was written basically as the crisis, that was before collusion. So that was like as things were actually going down, Obama was in office, his funding, and this is not like speculation, his actual funding to actually be elected, predominantly the largest single donor was Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
So you can't look at that actual fact and think there is a disconnect between the two. And I honestly think that this connection between Wall Street and Washington, and I write about this a lot, it's bipartisan. It's whoever can get the most out of the relationship on both sides will do that. But yes, in Obama's case, that was his number one political donor.
And not only that, you look at what happened with Trump a few days ago. The FBI raids his Mar-a-Lago mansion. I'm going, this reminds me of Gestapo. So it was, I just can't believe what's happening. How can they raid a president's house? And that's what everyone was afraid of during World War II. The Gestapo would come knocking, so they hired 87,000 new IRS agents, and the FBI can come into your house. Now, they don't want IRS agents taking your teeth. They're after your money. So if you understand what's going on, that's why your work, being an insider, is priceless. I mean, we're being lied to, and look at the teachers' unions, the biggest political donors to campaigns, and they love the Democrats. I'm not Republican or Democrat, but I just want them to tell the effing truth. You know what I mean? You're socialists and you're communists and Nazis.
But I think to your point about the IRS in general, and this gets kind of to the core of that disconnect between the markets getting sort of free and leverageable money from central banks around the world, including the Fed, and what's going on in the real economies is people aren't able to keep up. But on the taxation side, because the government isn't basically making enough money, right? It's borrowing money. That's how we run the country.
They can't pay the debt. So they borrow so much more, but they're trying to tax you more to pay the debt.
Well, exactly. And that goes back to this disconnect between the markets and the real economy, because if the real economy is not keeping up, that means it's not making enough money to basically fund itself. You know, whether that's on the private side or the public side, it's just not making enough money. And so the taxation that you then go through is related to the fact that we've got this gap between what the real economy makes and what it looks like the markets are doing, because they have this fabricated money going into them. It's all connected.
Right. Kim, any comments?
Well, my question is, does the Fed have any idea what they're doing, Nomi?
No, they're evil. They're evil.
They're supposed to be the smartest guys. Do they really have any idea? I mean, are they really, is it just like this experiment? Let's try this. Let's see if this works. Let's see if that works.
That's what I think. Yes. Because if you look back to, and Robert mentioned Helicopter Ben, if you have the ability in your job to just create money when you think it's needed, without considering an exit plan, without considering what that really does to distort the markets from the real economy, without considering tomorrow, that's a very reckless job to have if you do it wrong. What the Fed has done the entire time is get its timing wrong and overstep its power. So if, there's no reason to create $4.5 trillion worth of money to, quote, save the economy when you don't see any signs that that's what it's doing. Right. There's some very, credentialed economists working at the Fed and for the Fed. And what it seems to me that constantly what's happening is there's not an accurate, just assessment of what's really going on for real people and their real paychecks, their real pocketbook. Like, for example, right now, unemployment looks like it's low. So the Fed's saying, all right, unemployment's low. We can raise rates to fight inflation. Not that the two are related, but let's pretend they are. So the reality, though, is that a lot of people are working multiple jobs, and those multiple jobs don't really come in as multiple jobs or fractional jobs into the Fed's numbers, into the Fed's thinking. So whatever they think about unemployment is not related to people's experiences. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, with inflation, they missed the whole boat that they capsized in terms of creating money to be leveraged throughout the paper markets over the years. They didn't consider that inflation. They did not consider that they were inflating the markets, even though they were inflating the markets. I completely didn't even think that was a thing. Then we get to COVID and they do it more. And then we get to a situation where food prices are higher, energy prices are higher. And the Fed has nothing to do with that, but now they're fighting it. So it's like they're positioning themselves as this inflation fighting hero when they don't notice it happening when they create it. And then when it happens in an area they can't control, they're like, we're going to fight it by raising rates and doing all these other things. And they create instability in the markets and the economy as a result. So I don't think they understand what they're doing.
So you're saying they're not evil. They're just stupid.
Basically, again, individually, anyone could be evil or not evil. But yes, they are definitely stupid with respect to understanding the ramifications of what they do. Again, if you and I could just create money, not make money, right? Not invest, not produce, not learn, just create it with because we feel like it.
What I think was funny was Obama bails out the banks, then he orders Bernanke, they're supposedly not connected, the central bank and Obama, but he says, okay, Ben, helicopter it to the people now. Okay, we propped up the bankers and the Wall Street and all this. Now let's give a few dollars to the people. And that was stimmy checks. And if you watch history, you can see it playing out. Again, it's not what they say, it's what do they do. When we come back, we're talking more about Nomi Prins and find out what goes on inside these people who are not evil. They're just plain stupid. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news and bad news about money. And by now, I think most of you know there's a lot of bad news out there. And Our guest today is Nomi Prins, longtime friend, somebody I love and respect, and her books are eye-opening. The reason they're eye-opening is because she came from the inside. I mean, she came from hell, and she told us what it's like. It's called the banking system. And so she's telling us her latest book is Permanent Distortion, but it really is how the banking system is creating more people. Is creating this gap. It's a social problem. The gap between rich and poor is getting wider and wider and wider. And my whole shtick is that are the central banks, as a government and the U.S. Treasury and politicians, are they evil or stupid? And we haven't come to an answer yet. Any comments, Kim?
I think it's a combination, actually. But yeah, so Nomi's new book. Nomi, when's your book coming out?
October 11th. It's available for pre-order everywhere now. So
definitely get that book. You want your eyeballs open and seeing what's really going on. Don't listen to what they're saying. Watch what they're doing.
And Permanent Distortion, your subtitle I love, is how the financial markets abandoned the real economy forever. So to that point, how do you see this playing out? Is there a brightness at the end of the tunnel, or does it look like a train wreck?
So that's a really good question. There is a brightness at the end of the tunnel, and I do address it in my book, and I do think there's areas to invest as a result. The downside first is that when we have such a distortion, and I do think this is our reality, this is our lifetime. We have a situation where central banks continually fuel the market with fabricated money, which means it goes to the banking system, it goes to Wall Street, it funnels basically debt between the Fed, the government, Wall Street, etc., and none of that borrowed money gets into the real economy. So in a way, it's pointless to borrow it. So you have an indebted government, but it's not necessarily planned into the real economy. That's a problem. It goes into financial markets. That creates instability. That creates, as Robert said, more poor people, more social unrest. It creates a situation on the negative side where people are so disconnected in their real daily lives from what they see sort of happening at the financial sort of realm of Wall Street and the markets, is that they get angry. They get disenfranchised. They riot. They want to fight back because they feel so uneasy about this whole situation. Now, on the positive side, I do believe that there are some sectors that evolve out of this great distortion, this permanent distortion, that will see a combination of that money flow, of that cheap money, but also our major growth areas, which can help the economy and get us out to that extent of some of this mess. And I break those into transitional energy sources and materials, commodities, infrastructure in terms of whether it's water, whether it's ports, whether it's roads, and the actual structuring and the materials that go into that. So again, real stuff. Transformative technology. So not things like Facebook where it's just sort of connecting. It's not real, but the kind of technology that allows us to, create better architecture, to create better transportation, to basically create better, data, more secure data and all of that to drive our economy. Meta reality. So basically, not the metaverse, but the technology, that actually allows us to do things better. That includes medical transformations. That includes, a surgeon in the UK being able to provide services to someone in California or vice versa if it's their expertise without traveling. So things that help us. And also to an extent, the decentralized financial world. Because again, we talked about how Wall Street gets all of this money for free and leverages it and makes a lot of mistakes, gets bailed out, Fed comes in, debt gets created, this whole cycle. I really believe that blockchain technology, decentralized finance, companies that create a direct link between people and do not involve Wall Street banks in the financial realm. There's still financial services, lending, buying, all of that, but without Wall Street touching it. I also think that's going to, because of all the unrest and how just widespread that is around the world, I think those are all sectors where we're going to see a lot of growth from an investment standpoint and potentially to help our overall economy relative to just the flow of financial assets going up because money is floating into the markets.
Right. But my whole point, if you understand the problem, you might be able to make better choices, decisions. And I love what you say in your introduction. It says here, the very existence of this debt became an inconvenient excuse for governments the world over to cut budgets and reduce public spending in areas such as medical care, education, retooling for workers, and infrastructure. So our debt is eating us alive.
Right.
But when Helicopter Ben Bernanke says, okay, well, we've given enough, when Obama says, I'm going to bail out the banks and GM and all those guys and the finance markets, then Helicopter Ben says, well, we should give some to the people. Now, all that's debt. And so let me read it again. The very existence of this debt became a convenient excuse for governments the world over to cut budgets, reduce public spending in areas such as medical care, education, retooling for workers, and infrastructure. That's ripe for revolution right there. We're getting and what happens is when people are suffering financially, what happened when Obama was in market, they said, how in the world can he bail out the rich? And I'm losing my house. And at that point, the people, the proletariat who became Trump devotees, the Tea Party movement for sake, they get angry and they take their anger out rather than understand the problem. And the reason I like, your books, Collusion, All the Bankers' Men, and this book here, Permanent Distortion. If you understand the cause of the problem, you might be able to do something about it. But to go to a government solution, saying, well, the government should do this, good luck. The government is not on your side, as you know. And Obamacare was about healthcare, but it was really about insurance. It really wasn't about your healthcare. And it was a political ploy. Like they're going to forgive the student loan debt now. The woke group in wherever they are in the House, led by AOC. They're going to forgive the government debt. The student loan debt. Why? They can get elected. Yep. Does that do? Right.
Yeah, and they're so afraid of this, just what you're talking about, Nomi and Robert, the civil unrest. I was just reading that Governor Newsom in California, and Nomi, you would know this better than me, is proposing to give people inflation checks. So to hedge against inflation and the cost of food and the cost of gas. Because to your point, I think the politicians are so afraid of this civil unrest and this uprising. It's happening right now in Panama. They're having uprisings in Panama for this exact reason. But they're so afraid that they just want to throw money to keep everybody quiet.
How about Sri Lanka? Man, that's the place, a rich country. Yeah.
Well, it's, what's interesting about it's scary is that none of that is really thinking of a longer term solution to, again, making people more secure because the economy is growing, because you're not just creating debt, you're not just sort of giving it into the banking community and the markets, right? So all of it's very short term. To your point, Cameron, it's very short term, and it's related to, and this is the thing about politicians, right? The main goal of a politician is to get reelected. That is it. Right. And so anything else is sort of just, after the fact. Right. So to do that, you are looking at where are people hurting the most. OK, well, if they are hurting in food, how can we make that, easier? But what we need to be doing is stepping back and saying, well, how can we make food production part of the economy in a bigger way here? Right. So how can we basically look at the food shortage problem or look at the inflation problem and actually build a better mousetrap here with respect to food transportation, with respect to more efficient and cheaper modes of energy and transportation? Like, how can we do all that to better the whole economy so that we don't have to worry about the inflation of those sorts of prices relative to what people make, relative to them living paycheck to paycheck? Right, because that's what creates unrest. That's what creates anger. That's what creates people out in the streets. That creates higher crime, higher homelessness, and all of that. We're not focusing on like anything beyond the next election, and that is not a way to assume your economy is going to be solid and grow. That's just not possible. And we see that in country over country. Like that doesn't work anywhere.
So again, we go to the bigger picture problem, but a lot of people don't understand the problem, which was the original question I had for you. Are these guys corrupt or just stupid? And then the court is still out here.
Right.
Look at what happened in Sri Lanka. A lot of that problem was because of the Green New Deal. They wanted those people to shift to organic fertilizer. They couldn't produce enough. And that's what's going on here too. So, I wrote about my book, Capitalist Manifesto. The Green New Deal movement is a socialist move. They want to give everything to the people, and Rich Dad and you and Kim and I said, why not teach people about money? I mean, why don't you teach them? But you can't teach people if your leaders are stupid or corrupt. And you
don't understand economics, which I'll definitely give all of them. I'll put all of them in the box of just not understanding. Because what's economics? Basically, it's you and I paying for stuff we need to live, right? And how, whatever that looks like, right? The profit in that, the investment, whatever it looks like. An economy is literally an exchange of items and services for money. And when those things don't match.
Who's in charge of education? NEA. And you heard what Trump, I'm not pro-Trump or against Trump, but he stood up there at the CPAC thing and he says, let's abolish the Department of Education. You got a thunderous applause. That wouldn't be possible 10 years ago. Before 10 people thought teachers walked on water. But this is a story of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. My poor dad was a PhD, poor as a church mouse. He's teaching kids. Are you kidding me?
To that point, and we've talked about this on your show, I think multiple times, that, we don't have an education system that teaches money. It doesn't teach practical investment. It doesn't teach the relationship between what's going on around you and how you can basically, become just more secure, just financially, because it's just not part of any curriculum. I was talking to my nephew, who just graduated high school, he's going to college, he's going to UT, he wants to be a doctor. But him and all his friends are investing money, and they're talking to each other, and they want to learn. And he says to me, this is so interesting. How come they didn't tell me about, I'm not saying, a 5-year-old has to invest in the stock market, but why didn't they teach any of this when I was in school? Why is this all happening now? And it's because we don't have that in our education system, and we definitely should. It would make people more secure. It would make them understand money better. It would make them more educated. It would make them ask better questions, and it would create a better economy for everybody.
In theory, yes.
In theory.
In reality, you can't do that if the system is rigged against you, is what you're saying in your books.
Yes.
The system is rigged for the rich, not the poor and middle class. And I went to school. I'm an oil guy. I went to Kingsport Merchant Marine Academy. I was a tanker officer driver, so I was in the oil industry. And you look at when Biden cut off the XL pipeline, and also the price of, Kim and I own oil wells. We're being paid $30 a barrel. And the moment he cut down that pipeline, oil went from 30 to 130. And we wonder, why is there inflation?
Right.
That SOB, Biden cut the oil off, and then he blames Russia for doing it. I mean, and then Yellen gets up there and she's talking about Green New Deal. She's Treasury Secretary or something?
Yes.
And she's talking about that and Green New Deal and going, what? Are we nuts? Have we lost it? And everybody knows, every politician, like congressmen and senators, they can inside trade, but you cannot. Give me a break. So that's where you're on. And your books expose the underside, the dark side, the inside. So when I was reading Collusion, I was going, oh my God, that you verified my suspicions as you've been on the inside.
Yeah. And they were doing this all through the pandemic. I mean, I've got all this information in the new book, Permanent Distortion, where members of the Fed, members of Congress, were literally buying up companies, shares in companies right before there was this infusion of fabricated and fake money. And yeah, they were making a ton of money. And, from everyone, from Nancy Pelosi's husband to her, it just didn't matter what side of the aisle they were on. There was so much money being made. A couple of people from the Fed did resign as a result when public scrutiny was sort of attached to them. But so in that respect, to your question before about are they evil or stupid? So they are corrupt and stupid. They are definitely corrupt and stupid because they have the avenues for that corruption. And then some may be evil and some may not be evil. But the reality is they have that ability. Well,
I think you said something very important, is that it's okay for Nancy Pelosi to trade from the inside. but it's not legal for a Fed person to do that.
Well, that's interesting as well.
The rules are different.
Yes.
Got no rules.
So let me ask you this, Nomi.
Yeah.
So we're not going to uncorrupt the system. It's that addict has got that needle in there pretty heavy. And you're talking about, the solutions in building infrastructure and building production in the U.S. and doing all that. How do you see that happening as the government is not capable of doing that?
Well, I see it happening around the government. So, for example, I did a big trip to the Midwest of this country, heartland of this country. I was in Ohio. I was in Indiana. I was in, Missouri. I basically the whole belt of the country. And starting in Ohio, there's a ton of plants that are basically, taking sort of iron pellets out of the ground, out of mines, and they're fabricating them into steel, which is used to build infrastructure. And they're doing it more economically, more technologically advanced all the time. And that creates profit in production that we actually need to build stuff. So they don't do that because of the government, not the government. They do that because that's their business. And there's a lot of plants like that are doing what they do, and what they need for the rest of the economy or people to do is to either invest, to know what they're doing. It gives people jobs. It gives a foundation of this country that's just better. I travel on fast trains, for example, whether it's in China or whether it's in Japan or wherever. We've got, there's such better just even transportation systems in different places than there are here, because we spend all our time as a country. I mean, us, talking about where funding is going to go, where money is going to go, and how much debt it's going to need, and all this kind of stuff, without actually getting stuff done. This is the main problem. We don't get stuff done.
No, I understand. Everybody goes solution really quickly. One of the problems is, what is the problem? And the problem is the system is rigged.
That's right.
A few people. And that's what you're writing about. So we can talk, we should borrow money to do this. I mean, friends of mine say, if we just spent trillions of dollars on cancer research, I'm going, but where does that money come from?
Well,
and that's what I'm trying to say. That's why people should read your books. You understand the source is our money. It's how it's created out of debt, and it's free money to the rich, but you tax the poor. That's money. That's 1913, right? The Federal Reserve Act. 1913, the Fed was created, and 1913, the IRS was created, because money can only be debt and taxes. So the question is, are you in debt and you paying taxes, or what? So Kim and I are deeply in debt. We pay no taxes. Mm-hmm. That's financial education. Mm-hmm. That's the problem. Without that education, you don't know it. And there's always insider trading. The question is, how far from the inside are you? That's right. So I don't own any stocks, but Kim and I are insiders in companies we take public.
That's right.
And the average guy cannot do that. But that's why I'm saying I love your work, because you give the average person like Kim and I an insight of the dark side. And if you can understand that, you can listen to all the politicians like Obama. I'm a black man. I'm going to save all of us, and everybody loves me and all this. Meanwhile, he's bailing out the rich. Right. And where does he live? He doesn't live in Harlem or some ghetto.
He does not.
I mean, he was in Martha's Vineyard. He has the biggest house in Hawaii. I'm going, and then there's this critical race theory going on. They own the largest properties on the island of Maui in Hawaii. He and Oprah and all those guys, and going, why don't you guys tell the truth? Tell us the truth. Anyway, we come back with a final wrap up here. So I love your work, Nomi, because you show the inside, and the real problem is it's rigged against you. Be right back. Welcome back, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Radio Show, the good news about bad news about money. Again, as guest Nomi Prins. And my whole shtick is that none of us know what money is. And it's in the creation of that money that the problem lies. So that's why Nomi's latest book, Permanent Distortion and the Banker's Men and Collusion, I love. She sees on the inside of how money is actually created. And the problem is our money, because it's no longer money. It's fake, and it's rigged for the rich. And if you're not educated, you're not going to be rich. Or you have to be rich already. Like, Tiger Woods is not hurting, and what's his name? Bezos ain't hurting. But the country is. The gap between rich and poor is too wide. And if you tell them to work harder and save more money, you just get taxed more. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. So final word, Sarah, final word on your part.
Nomi, thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to your book coming out in October, and we'll be posting a link we'll be posting a link for our listeners to access it in the show description.
It's a very important book. You better understand the problem is our money. If that's why lesson number 1 in Rich Dad Poor Dad is the rich don't work for money.
That's right.
If you can understand that one, and what a school teacher tell you, go to school, get a job, work hard, save money, get out of debt, and invest for the long term in the stock market. Sucker play all the way. Kim, final word.
So Nomi, thank you so much. One of the biggest services I see you're doing is number 1, educating people about how the system really is. And you're opening up people's eyes. You're waking people up. And I have a belief that the more people that wake up to what's going on in government, with the Fed, with the banks, the more people that wake up, the more opportunity we have to turn this thing around. And I know it's a huge undertaking, but if people can get in control of their own financial life, that will make the world a better place. So I thank you for your gift and your talent and your writing and being out there, being outspoken. I think it's a tremendous service you're providing. So with that, I would love your final words, Nomi.
Well, I thank you so much for both of you, and all that you do. And I think, again, the system is rigged. There is no doubt. When you have $9 trillion, on offer from the Fed, $41 trillion on offer from all the central banks around the world, it seeps through Wall Street and other big banks into the pockets of the people that run that system. That's not money that's going to the real economy. It's just not. It doesn't matter what they say. As Robert said, matters what they do, and it matters what the money does. The money's not going there when it's just fake. So yes, it's absolutely important to know that. It makes you mad. I mean, there's examples in my book, Permanent Distortion, where it's like, okay, this politician made this amount of money, this Fed person made that amount of money. This is why there is such a gap between real people and the markets and the elite that run them. And it's important to know that. But knowing that, there are also opportunities to get more educated, to become better at your own financial world. And yes, that's a lovely way to say it, Kim, is to basically build from that. Maybe if we all know a bit more, we can turn a little of the ship around. We can't make it less corrupt. We can't make those people less stupid or less criminal, but or less rigged. But we can make a difference in our own lives, and that is what I'm dedicated to doing. What my books are dedicated to exposing. And I just am grateful for the opportunity to share this with you.
Right. And that's what you have with your book, Collusion. You have an insider's view of what really goes on in the central bank in the U.S. called the Fed, or Bank of Japan, Bank of England. But there was a great also book written by G. Edward Griffin called The Creature from Jekyll Island. First chapter, the name of the game is bailout. And they'll always bail out the rich. But the poor and middle class pay for it in taxes. Right. So you got one choice. You can get stupid or get poor quickly. Get smarter quickly. Buy Nomi's books. Thank you, Nomi.
Thank you so much.
And thank all of the Rich Dad Radio Show. The name of the game is Bailout of the Rich. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thôi mong chờ vậy sao bật khóc trong ngu ngơ vẫn thế đây bao lâu nay em không hay chỉ một mình anh ngồi khóc nước mắt đây riêng nơi đây em không hay sự thật là anh nhớ em người giờ đã xa lời hẹn ước đâu rồi nước mắt đây rơi biết bao lâu thì khô vẫn thế đây bao đêm say em không hay từng giọt buồn sao mặn đắng nhưng lúc đây anh loay hoay trong cơn say lại nhầm rằng em ở đây người giờ đổi thay tình mình vẫn đong đầy thế mới biết anh vẫn yêu em thì sao tìm quên chốn xưa ngày ta quen